Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turn Wheel. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're going to be looking at some of the Greil Mercenaries. Only half of them, because what do you expect? There's like 10 of the motherfuckers. But we're going to be looking at Titania, Oscar, Boyd, Shinon, and Soren. That's basically a random grouping. I did have groups that I felt made a little bit more sense and were a little bit more connected thematically. But what that would have resulted in is that we wouldn't be able to do an SSS episode until after the next main episode. And then from there, we would have had to do 3 in a row and 3 SSS episodes in a row. And I did not want to do that. That sounded annoying. So we're going to do this one now. Now that we've met, all the characters that I've just outlined. And then next will be the main episode, and then we'll do the remaining Greil Mercenaries following that. So just a quick little forewarning. I don't think this is going to matter really to anybody listening, but just on the off chance, I should mention that some of the supports in this episode are going to potentially spoil some upcoming story events. And when I say upcoming, I mean like literally the next main episode. So if for whatever reason you don't know the story of FE9, but you are still listening to this podcast, maybe don't listen to this episode until after the next main episode comes out. If you don't want to, I don't know. It's up to you, but it shouldn't really matter. I think most people probably already know the stories of the games at this point. If anybody doesn't, I'd be very interested. If you're a person who listens to the podcast without knowing the story of any of these games, definitely let me know. I think as we get into the more popular, more recent ones, it's going to become less and less common. But I could absolutely see, if somebody went back and listened to the Yggdrasil episodes, if they haven't played either of the Yggdrasil games, that could be interesting. But yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's do Titania first. Titania supports with Ike, Boyd, Riss, and Mist. Now, I don't actually want to spend a lot of time on any of her individual supports, and that's not because I don't think they're good. I actually really like most of these supports. I think the only one that's not particularly good is the Boyd support, just because it's a little... I don't know, it feels a little generic. Titania and Boyd just kind of bickering about Boyd, not training hard enough, and Titania wanting to make sure that he is sticking to his training so that he can become stronger and all that. It's a little bit. It feels very much like we've been here before. I do like the relationship that Titania has with just about everybody that she supports with. The only ones that she supports with, you might notice, are other Greil Mercenaries. So that dynamic of she's a mentor, and we're gonna see this in a couple of her other supports. Being like a mother figure to these guys is really, it's really sweet and wholesome to see. But the Boyd support, I don't think it really lands. Personally, I don't think it's that great. The other ones though are all excellent. Her Ike support is so sweet. They just bond over Greil because, and this is where the spoiler comes in. In mechanically, you are not able to view any of these support conversations until after Greil is dead, because that's when we gain access to the base, which is where we start to be able to see supports for the first time. And Titania and Ike, have some good bonding moments over what Greil was like, talking about Titania and Greil's history together. It does seem at the end of the Ace support, or I guess the middle of the Ace support, that Titania did have feelings for Greil, which is, not unreasonable. He's a nice guy, tough guy, obviously cares about people with how it seems very consistent. It seems to be very consistent characterization for the Greil Mercenaries that they will take jobs that pay very little or maybe sometimes nothing in order to do the right thing. So Greil obviously was a man of some good moral fiber. And I don't know. It's nice. Titania has apparently known Ike since he was like a little baby, to the point where Ike doesn't even remember the first time that he met Titania, apparently. Which is, it really adds some context to their relationship, that they they have known each other since before they were like officially a Greil, a mercenary company, the Greil Mercenaries. I don't know. It's just nice. Titania very much has a mom vibe, like I've kind of been saying. She reminds me of Avel in that regard. But except where Avel that didn't really become like a main focus until towards the end of the game, where she first where she gets unpetrified and all that, and it kind of becomes a focus there for a little bit. Titania kind of gives me that vibe, consistently throughout most of her supports. I'm sure if Avel had supports, they would read pretty similarly, but she doesn't. So the Riss support is really cool. I really like this support, and it's mostly for Riss. I've been like, I don't know what it is, but Riss has been really growing on me this playthrough. Like his scene with Ike earlier in the game, in chapter 4, I believe, and then this support, and then just like, I don't know, seeing him in action, right? He's just a fun character. You can tell how much he cares for people. And I don't want to go into too much detail on what I like about him in the support. We'll save that for next episode. But on Titania's end, you can tell how much she really values and respects Riss, and how much care and compassion she has for him. She's very worried that being a mercenary is not like what is going to bring him fulfillment. He's kind of a frail person, and she doesn't want him to get caught up in a dangerous life, that he's not prepared for. But they kind of talk about that. Riss says like, no, this is really what I really want to do. And Titania accepts that. So it's nice. I like their dynamic here. The A support, I feel like this is a pretty consistent theme that I saw across a lot of the supports that I read for this episode, is that a lot of the supports seem like they're going somewhere interesting in the C and B supports, but then the A support kind of just like fumbles it a little bit. And I feel like the Titania and Riss support does that, because the A support is just them talking about Ike, which is not like, it makes sense for them to be talking about it, right? Like they're both... I don't know how old Riss is. I always got the impression that he was one of the older members, behind, compared to like Oscar and Boyd, who are like basically teenagers, right? So, maybe having this sense of like, we're these older members looking over our new commander, like, let's talk a little bit about that. But I just don't feel like it lands very well for these characters. They don't have any kind of like stake in it, like thematically, like they, it's not like they compare Ike to themselves or anything like that. I don't know. I feel like it doesn't really go anywhere interesting, but maybe that's just me. The Titanium Mist support is cute. There's nothing really noteworthy about it other than we're seeing our first instance of something that's going to crop up in a few supports, where for the first time in the entire series up to this point, supports can have changes. The supports can be contextual. I guess it is also worth noting, just as a side note, that in 6, 7, and 8, all of the supports, took place during battle, because there was no other place for them to take place, really. I mean, I guess in FE8 it could have been on the world map. But it, all, and that got written into the supports, like, oh, should we really be talking in the middle of a battlefield? How many times have you read that in a GBA support? But the supports in FE9 and in most future games, actually, I think all future games, they do not take place in the middle of the battles. They take place in separate menus between battles. So that's a bit of a difference in context that might matter for some of these supports. But what I was originally saying is that sometimes, depending on certain story events, like where you are at in the game, whether certain characters are alive or dead, I think those are the only two things. But those can impact the writing of some of the supports, and usually it's in very minor ways. Like Titania, is talking to Mist about doing laundry, and Mist says, "Oh yeah, no, I'd like to. I want to help out people. The other Greil Mercenaries or whatever." But in, later on in the story, when we start to work with the Crimean army, I guess, spoilers, but it doesn't seem like that big of a spoiler to me. Mist mentions kind of offhandedly, like, yeah, I can't do laundry for the whole Crimean army, but I'd like to at least help, our comrades. Stuff like that. It's usually very minor. There's like a difference, I think, in one of the Makalov supports, whether Marcia is alive or dead. That's kind of interesting, but for the most part, it doesn't make a tremendous difference. And yeah, it's just the two of them bonding. Again, Titania, not to keep going back to this well, but it's they kept going back to the well and the support, so I don't know what you want me to tell you. Titania kind of taking on a motherly figure. She even compares herself directly to Mist's mother. She says, I may not be Elena, but I do care about you just the same. Elena being obviously Mist's mother. I like Mist here, and that'll kind of come out in her episode. I don't know how I'm gonna feel about Mist at the end of the day. I think she's nice. I think she's fun. But either way, Titania is a good character. I really like the vibes that she has. It's clear, as especially after Greil dies, which again, all these supports take place after Greil's death. Being the most senior member of the company, right? Being friends and comrades with Greil since before it was even like a formal mercenary company. It's clear that she is trying to take on the role of a mentor and someone who can help guide the younger members and help them both in their training and their martial stuff, but also just as people and as being a figure of guidance for them as people, which I think is really cool. It's fun to see. Okay, let's move on to Oscar. Oscar supports with Ike, Kieran, Janaf, and Tanith. And I gotta say, guys, I really like Oscar. There's some really cool supports in here. I think the least interesting one for me is the Janaf support. It's fun, and it's like pretty funny. I like Oscar's. Oscar's usually a very calm and composed person. So I think seeing him, very much on the back foot, and being very hard on himself, like, you stupid Oscar, like, he keeps calling himself stupid. I'm imagining himself like hitting himself on the head too, berating himself for being so stupid in his Laguz interactions, which is pretty fun to see that side of his character. But otherwise, I don't think they really do much substantial with it, so I'm not going to spend any time on it really. The Ike support is pretty cool, and I like how much it contextualizes Oscar and Ike's relationship. They clearly have a history together. I don't know how long Oscar has been in the Greil Mercenaries. Actually, we could take a general estimate, right? Because I think we know from later stuff that Boyd was very young, probably not even of fighting age when Greil found them and sort of took them in. Oscar was probably the only one at that point who was able to fight. So it seems like it's probably been a few years since they met, and that's just an estimation on my part, but I think it's a fair guess. And it's just like them bonding, and well, maybe not bonding, but like demonstrating their bond, and having good interactions together, which I like. There is one line that's not related to either of their characters, but more of like a world building thing that I find pretty interesting. And that is a line from their B support, where Oscar where they're talking about fighting bird Laguz, because theoretically, assuming you're deploying them, every chapter, this is the part of the story where you're going to be fighting, like the ravens on the pirate ship and all that. So Oscar and Ike, they have a cool moment here. So there's a line here where Oscar says that when the bird Laguz turn into their true selves, we are forced into a kind of battle that is difficult for us. And I found that wording to be really interesting, because I don't think we ever get a lot of detail on, the Laguz sort of culturally, and how they see themselves. I mean, that's actually, I think, one of the biggest things that makes it hard. One of the things that I think makes the Laguz stuff fall short as a racism allegory is because we don't often get the perspective on matters that the that the oppressed group has, right? It's always through the lens of the oppressor, which I think is can be interesting in its own way. But either way, that's a complete tangent. Either way, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because to describe a Laguz as being not their true self when they're in their their unshifted form is very interesting, and I think does not line up with how they sort of talk about themselves. I mean, mechanically, right? It's more like it's their fucking ultimate, right? Like they build up their gauge and then they turn into a fucking tiger or whatever, or in this case, a raven or a hawk. But in gameplay, it very much seems like their unshifted form is their sort of default, right? Like it doesn't require any energy to maintain that form. So to describe their fully animalistic forms as being their true selves is it's interesting, is an interesting perspective on how the Lagus operate. And I would be very curious to see if there's any more anything related to that later, potentially from the Lagus themselves. Like, do the Lagus see their beast forms as their true forms? Or, I feel like that's kind of reductive, right? Like, I don't think maybe they probably don't see either form as their true form, right? It's just like, that's just who they are. So I'm incredibly I don't even know if nitpicking is the right word, because I'm not criticizing at all. But I'm giving a microscopic level of attention to this one tiny line that was probably just written in there as like a throwaway, way to make the conversation flow better. But I find it super interesting, and I'm curious to see if it ever goes anywhere else other than that. Okay, then the last two supports are with Kieran and with Tanith. And I think I'm going to talk about both of these together because I think they both demonstrate similar aspects of Oscar's character, particularly the way that Oscar conceptualizes honor and his relationship to the concept of honor. It comes up in both of their supports, albeit fairly briefly, but I think it is essential pillar of both of their supports. With the Kieran support, apparently Oscar used to be I'm sure this is going to come up later, but Oscar used to be a knight, a Crimean knight, not a royal knight the same way Titania was, but actually, was Titania a royal knight? Hold on, let me see. Okay, maybe Titania wasn't a royal knight. I think when I think of Crimean knights, I think of the Crimean royal knights because of Radiant Dawn, but I'm sure there's plenty of non-royal knights. Anyway, Oscar used to be a knight, or at least the knight in training, and Kieran, sort of developed a rivalry with him. It was a very one-sided rivalry. Oscar didn't even consider it a rivalry, but Kieran was very invested in it, and throughout the support, he's asking Oscar to come back and join the knights again, wondering why someone could give up on the honor of being a knight for the mercenary life. And Oscar essentially says, well, like, I don't really have... There's nothing I can do with honor, right? Like, it's this idea that doesn't mean anything to me. But these values that I hold of, wanting to help people, like being in a position to be more active in the lives of, the citizens of Crimea who are suffering, or who need my help. That's something that I hold on to. That's something that I value much more than, a knight's idea of honor. Which I think is very interesting and very, really, really cool characterization for Oscar. I like Oscar a lot. But possibly even more than his Kieran support, I love his Tanith support. It's rare. Tanith has a reputation for being sort of a very harsh person, especially with, like, Marcia. But, I'm curious to see, in her later supports, if that will, if that's more of a perception of just because Marcia is a former subordinate of hers, and she's just very harsh with her subordinates, because she's very respectful to Oscar. She takes his criticism to heart, and she seems to genuinely care about his advice. By the end, she's asking him to teach her how to cook. All really interesting. By the way, Oscar, just a nice little piece of flavor. Oscar is a very good cook, apparently. It comes up in most of his supports, or at least a couple of them. But this support, once again, brings up Oscar's relationship to the concept of honor in a way that's distinct from his support with Kieran, in a way that I think is interesting. It's about, he offers her basically tactical advice, and tries to, instill in her the idea that in practical terms, right, like, having honor doesn't mean anything if you're fucking dead. And, he brings his own experience as a mercenary into it, right? Where there's only, like, how many, like 10 Greil Mercenaries at the end of the day, like maybe less, depending on, for most of Oscar's time as a Greil Mercenary, there's only like 7 of them, maybe fewer. So, he had to learn very quickly that, you cannot, you have to minimize the risk to yourself at all times. And, fighting with honor, sometimes is a quick way to just get yourself killed. And so from that perspective, he's able to give some good advice about how to handle situations where you're at a numbers disadvantage, or the tactics, the environment isn't necessarily in your favor. It's pretty cool. And I like to see him, especially for, again, I'm pretty sure he's pretty young. I think he's like 20 or 21 or something like that. It's clear that he has a lot of valuable advice to give, which is just nice to see. I like their dynamic, and the fact that Tanith is so receptive to it, I think is interesting as well. So anyway, that is all for Oscar. Great character. I love Oscar. Let's go ahead and move on to Boyd. Boyd supports with Titania, Mist, Brahm, and Ulki. I already talked about the Titania support. I mean, I didn't really, but I'm not planning to change that. It's pretty whatever. Not my favorite support for either of them by any means. The Mist support, though, is okay. I like it as characterization for Mist a lot, which I guess we'll come into when we talk about Mist in the next episode. But her perspective of, like, basically Boyd knocking some sense into her, like, just because you're Grail's daughter, just because you've been alongside us mercenaries for a while, doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be good at fighting. And it's cool to see not only Boyd be able to express that idea and also, like, realize that maybe he went too far and needs to apologize, but also Mist just being very receptive to it, and not making a big deal out of it, right? Like, she's very, I don't know how old Mist is in this game. I think she's like 15. So the level of maturity that she displays here is cool. It's cool to see. I know I'm spending more time talking about Boyd than Mist. I really just don't have that much to say, though, to be honest. I like their dynamic. The A support, I don't know what the fuck is going on here, because again, similar to what I said earlier, right? The C and B supports feel like they're going somewhere interesting, and have like a unique, have like a connecting tissue that makes them feel related to each other. Like, there's a progression on an idea here. But then the A support just kind of completely goes nowhere. Mist is crying, and Boyd asks, like, hey, why, like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? Is there any way that I can be there for you? And then Mist, just kind of uses him as a shoulder to cry on, which is fine. But nobody, like, they're never established, like, what the hell is she's upset about? Like, she says that it's everything, which is not, like, this would make more sense to come, like, immediately after Grail's death, I guess. But, you need 17 support points to get here, so I don't, that's pretty late into the story. I don't know, like, if there's anything specific that she could be talking about. This would have been maybe a good opportunity to have, like, specific, because clearly they're willing to rewrite some lines if, depending on where you're at in the story. So this could have been a good opportunity to have her say something specific that maybe changes depending on, whether you're actively fighting with Dane, or whether you're, like, whether you're, like, in Dane territory, or maybe, like, once the story has moved on and you're fighting through Crimea, like, that could have been interesting. I don't know, but it just it doesn't go anywhere. But kind of weird. I don't know what they were thinking with that one, but it's an okay support for the C and B. Boyd and Brahm is really fun. And it's a rare, Boyd is typically characterized as kind of a meathead, and not very intelligent. He's very headstrong, which I think is how he comes across, especially in the main story. But this is an instance of of Boyd, actually having some interesting and insightful things to say. I think Brahm is, very, he's also a very simple dude, and I don't think Brahm is unintelligent by any means, but I think he would describe himself not necessarily as a thinking man, right? Like, he's a farmer, he's a soldier, he works the plow, in the fields and all that, and he's he's a very down to earth, humble view of himself, right? So I think compared to characters like, I don't know, like Titania and like Ulki, who are clearly like much more intelligent than him. Um, I think that and like much more mature than him, much more wisdom, I guess maybe is the right word. But compared to Brahm, who they seem to be operating at a similar level intellectually, I think it's interesting to see Boyd be able to have some more insightful and more thoughtful moments in this support. This one kind of has the opposite problem, where I think the C support is kind of whatever. The B support like starts to go somewhere interesting, but then they kind of bail out of it at the last second. It's not until the A support where I think that they really start to get into some good shit with the writing here. And he just asks Brahm, from his perspective as a simple country folk, because mercenaries in the wider world have something of a bad reputation because they're willing to take, most of them are willing to take any job. They're willing to get their hands dirty and do bad things if it means scoring a payday. And so Boyd has a little bit of insecurity about how the world at large views him as a mercenary. And Brahm drops a line here that I think encapsulates some of the best messaging from this game, honestly, and it's something we're going to see in the story over and over again. But Brahm says, here's what I think. Folks always judge, and they're usually wrong. That's just how they are, You can't worry about it too much. And I think that line is just so cool because it really does, I think, just sum up a lot of what Path of Radiance is trying to say in its messaging around ignorance and about judgment and about not drawing conclusions about people and about things that you don't know in any capacity. And when you operate like that, you're just gonna be wrong most of the time, right? Because you don't know any better. And I think that's really cool. I like Brahm a lot. And I'm very excited to get to his support episode eventually. I think I think it'll be one of the two that we do in a row next time. Not the Greil Mercenary one, obviously, but the one following that. And I don't there's something about Brahm succinctly summing up, as if it's like just common knowledge, the entire point of the story of the game, essentially. I think that's really cool, and I think it shows, something that I really like about Brahm's character, which is that he is, despite putting on a very humble, he acts very humble. He does not think super highly of himself intellectually, but he is, at the end of the day, like a very wise, thoughtful person who I think, is able to appreciate, some of the things that it takes people a really long time to fully learn and understand, which is neat. I like that. And then finally, the Ulki support for Boyd is okay. Their interactions are pretty fun early on, and then by the end, it becomes a lesson about, kind of a similar thing, where like don't judge people, don't jump to conclusions. Ulki feels bad because he assumes the worst of Beork, which I don't think we've heard that term yet in the main story, but it's basically what humans are, non-Lagus. And so, he feels bad for immediately assuming that, this Beork is trying to cozy up to me, get to know me, shower me in compliments. He must be trying to, trick me or setting up, a way to betray me or something like that. It's pretty basic, and I don't think the idea lands as well as it does in the Brahm Boyd A support. But unlike the Brahm and Boyd support, this one actually feels like a conclusion that's being built up to over the course of the entire support instead of just, like a little bit of the B support and then the A support. So it has that going for it, I guess. All right, we're getting close to the end here, especially since Shinon and Soren have fewer support partners than the other three. So Shinon only supports with Gatry, Rolf, and Janaf. And so I like all these supports. I think they all do a really, really good job of characterizing Shinon. Phenomenally good job of characterizing Shinon, where, he acts tough. He acts like he doesn't give a shit about anything. But at the end of the day, man, he's just a big fucking softie. Like, can we agree? I mean, he's still racist. Let's not get it twisted. I'm not saying that Shinon's a good guy or anything like that. He is horribly racist towards Laguz. But I think it shows that he does have some good qualities. And cares deeply about his friends and the people in his life. The Shinon Gatry support is Shinon. He's a bit harsh with Gatry for sure, but it turns out that Gatry is just a fucking idiot who falls for tricks and scams very easily. He would 100% see an email from a Nigerian prince and be like, oh man, I gotta help that poor guy. And plus he's gonna give me a huge payday when he gets back in power. Oh, score. Yeah, this is a great investment. And would 100% give that Nigerian prince all of his money. So Shinon kind of gives him a hard time for that. But I mean, can you really blame him? Because yeah, that's stupid. And he should probably, have learned his lesson by now. And, by the ace support, Gatry sort of gets swindled again. And we see a nice moment where consistently Shinon was basically making Gatry pay for his food. Like, hey, if you want me to do this for you, you're going to have to treat me to dinner. But by the end, Shinon is willingly saying, like, no, actually, this time I'll treat you, which I think is, it shows that their dynamic is reciprocal. It's not Shinon taking advantage of Gatry. It is genuinely Shinon trying to be there for someone that he considers a friend. Which is just nice to see. The Rolf support is so fucking cute, so wholesome. I love them so much. So there's sort of a lingering thread through the main story that Shinon, before leaving the Greil Mercenaries, as he is going to do next chapter or next whatever in a few chapters from now. After Greil dies, essentially Shinon leaves the mercenaries. But before he did that, apparently he sort of off screen built up a bond with Rolf, Oscar and Boyd's younger brother, and the two of them became have a sort of mentor apprentice dynamic. And the C support and B support are just them having very fun, wholesome interactions. Rolf calling him Uncle Shinon, which is fucking adorable. I think Rolf is probably I don't know, it feels like he's 12 in this game. So, pretty young. And then, by the A support, we get a good piece of characterization for Shinon, which is why he really hates. He has a very misanthropic view of the world, right? Thinking that people are the worst. Especially adults, right? He thinks adults are selfish people who are constantly looking out for themselves, rather than caring about other people. I think this adds a lot of context without actually saying anything outright for why he respects Greil so much. This is something I'm going to bring up in the next main episode because, for how much lip he gives everybody. He gives attitude to every single person he ever interacts with. For some reason, Greil is the one person who he follows every order, no backtalk whatsoever. He seems to get really defensive when other people imply that Greil, is not the fucking coolest guy ever. And I think part of it, obviously Shinon seems to value strength, right? He's very high and mighty about his abilities, and so somebody who is clearly his superior in that regard, I think is going to earn a lot of respect from Shinon. But I think more than that, seeing Greil as this person who goes against the grain and is more than than anybody that Shinon, having Greil be this person who goes against Shinon's view of the world, right? And this is a person who is clearly willing to take on responsibilities and to help people in ways that will be an active detriment to his own well-being, right? Taking jobs for free, all that stuff. I think the fact that Shinon, I think Shinon seeing that in him inspires a lot of confidence and a lot of respect. And this is all reading into what we see from his Rolf support, but I think it's very feasible, and I think I don't know. I think Shinon's such a layered and interesting character, And I'm a big fan of him. I was a little bit hesitant to call him my favorite Grail mercenary. Mostly because of the racism. Because like I do agree. I stand by this that a character can be a bad person and do horrible things while still being an interesting character, right? Like you don't have to think that somebody is a good person to like them as a character, if that makes sense. And but it's reading these supports back and seeing like all of these different sides of Shinon is like so cool, and I think it really solidified my love for him. Really, I think he's a great character. Okay, and finally the Janaf support is just the two of them bickering constantly. I don't like this one very much because the thing that they decide to come to terms over is, Shinon's like, it's not like I enjoy killing, and Janaf's like, what? He was under the impression, I guess, that Laguz or that Beork were all like murder hungry lunatics who just killed people for no reason. And so the slightest pushback on that idea, even against the most like racist, hateful person in the the most racist, hateful, playable character in the entire game, right? Like that. I feel like there's so many directions they could have taken this, and it feels like such a whiff, man. Like such a wasted opportunity, because if you're gonna make a support between the most racist character in the game and the Laguz, right? And you're gonna have the Laguz be the one that's like, oh man, I misunderstood you. I'm sorry. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, have him get owned. I don't know. Like, have him support with like Leith or something, and have Leith kick the dog shit out of him. I don't know. It's just a very weird direction for this to go. Like, why is this the thing that Janaf like, is this really the first person that he the first human that he's ever interacted with that didn't just like start talking about killing things? Like, I don't really get it. It just feels like a really weird way to explore this dynamic. And that didn't have to be the case. There's a lot of really good options for Laguz supports. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but give me like a few hours, I'm sure I could come up with a couple. I mean, I came up with one, but that one probably wouldn't have been as good. Maybe, you know what? Have him support with Marem. Marem is like the leader of a freedom fighters slave group, and like freeing slaves, like a slavery what's the word? Liberation. There we go. Like a liberation group. And you could have Shinon see the plight of Laguz in literal slavery, and maybe Shinon, he's like, I don't like you guys. I don't think you guys are I think I'm better than you, but also that doesn't mean that I think you deserve to be enslaved, right? And then maybe that could be a growing moment for him, right, where he realizes that maybe he's they have it like worse than he initially realized, and maybe Morim can get a sense of like, oh, there's all sorts of Laguz out there. There's some that are there's some that are good, and there's some that are literal slave owners, and then there's also a lot of people in between who are just sort of like passively bigoted, and have that be a learning moment for Morim. Not that like it's fine to be bigoted if you're not a slave owner. As long as you're not a slave owner, it's fine to be racist, guys. But no, just like the idea of like experiencing more nuance in his interactions with people. I think both of them could have really benefited from a support like that, but or at least Shinon could have. I don't know about Morim, but anyway, weird support that is like fine, but definitely not like they definitely could have done a lot more with it, I think, and taken it in a more interesting direction. Okay, and then finally we have Soren. Soren supports with Ike and Stefan. Those are his only two supports. I'm just going to talk about the Stefan one first, because Stefan's cool. This support isn't really like much. It's very short. It's basically Stefan immediately clocks Soren as a branded, which is something we don't really know what that is for the most part. I don't think we get a full idea of what that is until Radiant Dawn even. But in the ace support of Ike, we find out exactly what a branded is. Branded being essentially a someone somewhere down the line had a There was a Laguz and a Beork who had a child. And that child might not even be branded, right? They could be fully Beork or they could be fully Laguz, right? I don't, maybe it has to be fully Beork. I'm not sure exactly how the anatomy there works. But at some point in that bloodline, some more like one of your descendants may become a branded, who has like a certain mark on their figure. For Soren, it's on his forehead. It's the little dot on his forehead, or the diamond, I guess it is. And Stefan, immediately realizes that Soren's a branded. They have like a certain what is it, like they live for a while. They live for much longer than regular Beork do at any rate. And they age like much more slowly. So you can't really stay with anybody for too long, because you will it'll become immediately obvious that you're not aging at the same rate as everybody else, or eventually it will be. So Stefan, I guess Stefan has a group of branded in the desert that he is a part of, and invites Soren to join him essentially. If he decides that he can't, that he doesn't want to continue trying to be with the Beork anymore. Stefan is very convinced that it's not going to work out. Like, it's just not. He doesn't. Like, Soren's like, I want to stay with Ike. That's what I want to do. And Stefan's like, all right, dude. But when, like, not if, but when that stops working out, you come find me, all right, and we'll take care of you. Which is not, it's good to see that Stefan has a good sense of camaraderie with his fellow branded. The branded have it really bad. We find out about, throughout the story and supports of this game, we find out a little bit more about them, and they're treated very badly by both communities, especially by the Laguz. The Beork hate them. The Beork think they're like actively, pariah to society, and treat them badly. But the Laguz like literally pretend that they don't exist, which is like fucked up. Okay, and then the Ike Soren support. Now, I might catch some flack for this one. I do really like this support, but it's not. I feel like it could be better, is all I'm going to say about it, because the C support is great. Soren and Ike just, Soren demonstrating how much he cares about Ike. The B support is basically Soren trauma dumping, and it comes off as like this huge wall of exposition about Soren's backstory. But I kind of like it because it's lampshaded pretty well, by like Soren like literally just kind of going in. He's almost in like a trance, right? Like he's just rattling off all this trauma about himself that he's never had the chance to air out before, I guess. And Ike literally says like, Soren, like, snap out of it. Like, are you good? Like, and Soren realizes that he maybe things went a little bit too far. So it feels more natural for the exposition to come out this way, when in universe the person is like kind of letting on too much about themselves, which I think is interesting. And then finally the A support, Soren tells Ike that he is a branded, and Ike predictably does not care. He doesn't even know what a branded is at first, and so when Ike when Soren, explains what a branded is, Ike does not give a fuck. And I think here's the thing that I don't like about the support, right, is that if you're going to have a moment where Soren realizes that he is an accepted part of this group, like he feels welcome, he feels like somebody, he feels like people are going to care about him regardless of what his ancestry was. And like Ike does provide that for him, but it doesn't feel as powerful coming from Ike, in my opinion, because Ike has no stake in this socially, and like culturally. Ike doesn't even know what a branded is. He was never raised to have a negative opinion on the branded. It does not feel like a moment where Soren is like, another person is overcoming their prejudice to become better friends with Soren and to make Soren feel more accepted. That's not what's happening. Ike simply does not care. And that can be, that's endearing in its own way, right? Like, it shows that Greil really raised him right, without any sort of prejudice involved here. But it does speak to Ike's very simple, nature. And that's one of the best things about Ike as a character, really, is the nature of his he doesn't hold biases like that. Like he sees it as it is, right? If you're a good person, he's gonna like you. If you're a bad person, he's not gonna like you. And anything more complicated than that, he just doesn't give a fuck about. Which I don't want to get too far into talking about Ike, but we're gonna see that time and time again throughout the story, as that like that is Ike's bread and butter, right? That is who Ike is, and and that's fine. But if we're looking at it as Soren realizing that society can accept him, and that there is somewhere that he belongs, and it's right here, I think that would land better if it was somebody who maybe was previously biased towards the branded and has to get over that, I think that would make for a much more interesting dynamic, rather than Soren explaining what a branded is and Ike just kind of having like a clueless, like whatever. I don't know. That just doesn't feel as poignant to me, I guess. I don't know. But where's the drama? I need the drama. But yeah, overall, I like Soren a lot. Through this, he doesn't really have any characterization in the Stefan support. Very little, at least. There's a little bit there, but not a whole lot. But the Ike support, he's great. It's really pretty much Soren is a very important figure in the story. So we're gonna see as the story goes on more of him like getting to interact with others and stuff like that. So this is not the last Soren content that we will see, but for now this is all we get. But I think that they do a good job here with what they have, and it's he is clearly very you can see why he's so guarded and so like negative about everything all the time, is because he's so jaded from the horrible experiences that he's been through in his life. And that's why he kind of comes across as a dick. And that's pretty cool. I like to see that. There's a very similar, I would actually argue maybe inspired by Soren character in Three Houses, who I don't like. And I'm talking about Lysithea. And I mean, I don't really know ultimately. I think I know the biggest reason why I don't like Lysithea, and it's because she's mean to my favorite character, and not in a way that feels like funny or like she's being a hater, right? Like, I don't know, something about the way Soren is mean to people is funny to me, compared to Lysithea, who's just like so like venomous, man. But anyway, Soren's cool. That's pretty much all I have to say about him, and we're going to talk, again, pretty extensively about him as the story goes on. We're going to see his relationship with Ike develop. We're going to see his dynamic with Titania, where both Soren and Titania end up being sort of advisors to Ike, where Titania usually offers the more, like, human perspective and saying, like, we should do this because it's the right thing to do, whereas Soren is much more cold and analytical, and that's pretty cool, and I like that dynamic a lot. But yeah, so that's it from me for today. I hope you guys enjoyed me going through these characters. We're going to see a lot of great characters in this game. This is one of my favorite casts in the series. And I'm excited to share some of those guys with you. Next time, we're going to be doing the other half of the Greil Mercenaries. Riss, Riss, Rolf, Mist, Mia. Who's the last one? Oh, Gatry. Those will be the 5 that we talk about next time. So read up on those supports if you're interested. And until then, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.